Welcome to the Idaho Main Street Podcast, where we talk about the issues that matter to you. Every time when you fly in, like the moment you leave Reagan, do you always have just this like ease hit you, knowing that there's no votes for a while?
Yeah. What's really the good feeling is when I come into Idaho airspace.
Yeah, you can feel it, right?
I can
You
go.
know it. Man. So you'll love this. In Idaho history, fourth grade, we have to do our Idaho history projects.
Yeah.
And me as a fourth grader, I did mine on the delegation. So I went to your local office. I got your headshot.
All right.
I remember writing on a poster board at Harvard Law School, and I think I misspelled all three of those words, and wrote about all the things you were working on. And here we are. This is full circle.
And you got that? I want to see it.
It's probably somewhere in the basement. All right, we're excited. Today we've got the good senator from Idaho, the dean of the delegation, the chairman of Senate Finance, Senator Mike Crapo. Thanks for being here.
Thank you. It's great to be with you.
You're a busy man, so we appreciate you spending a little bit of time with us.
Well, I look forward to the opportunity.
And so let's talk a little bit about the shutdown showdown that just happened in D.C. Did you suspect that those Democrat senators would come over and vote for the funding bill, or was it really touch and go for a while?
Well, we figured they probably would in the end. You know, they hate Donald Trump. They hate everything about what the Republican Congress is doing. But they didn't have they were so set up that the whole country would know that they caused the shutdown if they didn't vote for it, that we figured some of them would come over.
And it's usually the Republicans that get blamed for shutdowns.
Yeah, this was an entirely different setup. You may have noticed that neither Senator Risch nor I have voted for a government shutdown, for a CR to close a government shutdown for years, maybe not ever. And this time we both voted for it, and so did every other Republican. The reason is all the other times we were coming up to a government shutdown because the Democrats were holding out on the appropriations bills in order to get more spending agreed to. And we weren't going to agree to their more spending, and so we voted no. This time, it was the Republicans who wanted to shut down the battles over last year's appropriations bills and start fresh cutting in our new appropriations bills. So it was the Democrats who were voting no, we aren't going to vote for cutting spending, and the Republicans saying, yeah, actually, we are.
It's such a different narrative than what we're used to. But everything in Washington seems to be a different narrative.
Yeah, it is. It's all-out warfare, unfortunately. It really is unfortunate. We have spent the last 10 weeks without a break, as you may have noticed, in the Senate, and our primary job was to get the president's team in place. We got all of the president's cabinet and sub-cabinet officials confirmed in the U.S. Senate over the last 10 weeks. And just to brag a little bit on the Senate, that gave President Trump in this presidency his team sooner than President Biden got his team, sooner than President Trump got his team the last time around, and sooner than President Obama got his team the last time around. So President Trump was helped by the U.S. Senate this time to get going early.
Yeah, we're seeing a lot more movement. What was it this time that's so different in other administrations that you were able to get that through so quickly?
I think it was primarily what I just said. We didn't take a Senate break for 10 weeks. And the Democrats were pushing us to deadlines. They were using the filibuster, making us beat each filibuster, which takes time, as you know. We have to go through multiple filibuster votes, and then we wait between each vote. And we were just saying to the Democrats, okay, if you want to push us through the weekend, we'll go through the weekend. If you want to push us to 10 o'clock at night, we'll go to 10 o'clock at night. If you want to work 24/7, we'll work 24/7. You tell us when you're going to come along and let us have the votes.
Wow. And I can only imagine what your phone lines were like during that period of time.
Oh, yeah.
But I think our listeners would be really curious on the insider baseball of Article 2, Section 2 gives advice and consent for you to approve or reject presidential nominees. What's that process like for Senator Crapo when he's deciding, is Senator Rubio the right person to be Secretary Rubio?
Well, the first step is, particularly with a Republican president, well, actually, it's with both Republican and Democrat presidents, but particularly with Republican presidents, I think that the president has the right for his choice, unless that choice is someone who's just absolutely unqualified for the job. And so the question is whether they're qualified, not whether I agree with every single thing that they say. And that's, I think, how almost all senators approach it for a president of their party. When it's a nominee from one of the other, like if President Biden's nominees, if I didn't agree with what I thought they were going to do, then I wouldn't support their nomination, even if I thought they were qualified. So that's the way I've approached it. And President Trump has put forward, as you know, a number of very aggressive, capable nominees for his cabinet and sub-cabinet positions. And although I won't tell you that I agree with what I think every single one of them is going to do, I do agree, frankly, with what I think most of them are going to do, or most of what everyone is going to do. And I believe that President Trump should have his team, and that's the way I voted.
Yeah. So, was there one specifically that surprised you? Because you typically meet in person. They come to your office. You could ask them questions. Was there one that came in that left you uniquely surprised at their aptitude?
Uh, yeah, and I will tell you of one, and that was Dr. Oz. Every one of them that came in was very capable. You know, there were no slowpokes in this group. But Dr. Oz is just an incredibly intelligent and capable person. I mean, wow. I'll put it another way. In his nomination hearing, the Democrats were all teed up to attack him in a number of different ways. They had even put out an attack document on the morning of his nomination about the things that they were going to go at him for. And the first round of Democrat questions was on that attack, and he handled it beautifully. And then each one, in fact, very quickly thereafter, as the Democrats started asking their questions, the attack sort of filtered away because he was so well at defending what they were coming at him on. And then they started getting into serious, real questions about, what he would do as the secretary or as the administrator. And it was just very impressive.
Wow, which is interesting because he has the TV doctor persona, and you would think that maybe there was out here we say like all hat no cattle, but you're saying he's the real deal.
He's the real deal.
I
I
love
mean,
that.
and it became very evident to his opponents in the nomination process that they could go at him, but they weren't going to get pull any wool over his eyes. And he was able to spar with them as aggressively as they'd ever been dealt with.
But this and this topic is particularly heightened right now, the issue of CMS and
Yeah.
what's going on in this space. Something you've fought for and cared about. For those who are concerned over access to affordable health care, what can you say to kind of cause ease to people that think that this administration is just going to cut and destroy everyone's access to get a doctor?
Well, first of all, the attack line is just as you have said, that we're going to cut everybody's benefits and we're going to stop them from being able to get health care and everything else. Uh, the first thing I would say is just it's not true. President Trump himself has said, and each of his nominees, whether it's the head of HHS or the head of CMS, has been clear on this that we are not going to cut Medicaid benefits, we are not going to cut Medicare benefits, and we're not going to cut Social Security benefits. We are going to look at waste, fraud, and abuse. And we're probably the first administration that has ever seriously meant that. And I think that's what's got everybody kind of jumpy because you've heard members of Congress on both sides say for years, oh, we're going to go cut the waste, fraud, and abuse. This administration is cutting the waste, fraud, and abuse. And this Congress is going to work with the president to do so. But what we do will be real waste, real fraud, and real abuse. And people who are concerned about whether that means they'll lose their access to health care, no, it'll actually be improved. Access to Medicaid and Medicaid benefits, it'll be protected. Same with Medicare and with Social Security.
Yeah, there's a scarcity mindset amongst some, though. They don't want to lose anything they've got, so they're holding on. And as you say, cutting wasteful spending should be a nonpartisan issue. Everyone should get on board with it. But the character of Elon Musk and Doge has caused some heartburn amongst people across the country if they've watched and are concerned, well, what's going to come of this? You're a thoughtful, experienced legislative leader. What's your take on what's happening with Doge?
Well, Doge is doing exactly what the president said he wanted it to do, which is to identify. They are doing a deep, very capable dive into governmental operations. And they are finding out a lot of things that are suspicious. And sometimes those things that look suspicious end up being not so suspicious. And as they shine a spotlight on these things, everyone gets worried. And then as we work through it, we tend to back it off into the right zones. There are things that look suspicious that are suspicious. I'll give you an example. Elon Musk looked at the age of everybody who has a Social Security number. He found a phenomenally high number of people who were over 130 years old who had a Social Security card. Well, we know that there aren't that many in that category. There's a lot of fraudulent Social Security cards. And so we're now looking at those to find out. There probably are some situations where they just didn't cancel the card, but there's not somebody using it wrong. But we're finding those things out, and we're getting down to the real facts and getting into the real abuse. I'll give you another example. Uh, those who are illegally in the country are not qualified for Medicare or Medicaid. They should not be accessing our safety net programs for American citizens. But some states are very aggressively loading them up. So because the states get money from the Medicaid programs, as an example. And so there are a lot of people who are obtaining Medicaid benefits, if you will, and they are not American citizens. That's an area where some consider to be fraud, not waste.
Right.
And but in any event, they are finding things like that. And that fixing those kinds of issues are the kinds of things that Americans want us to do. And so I'd say, yeah, there's a bit of a scare, as you referenced it out there, about whether this will be cutting to the bone or not. And I'm not going to say that we've got the right level figured out on every single thing, but we are figuring it out. And Doge is helping us identify it.
Yeah. And from day one, you've been very vocal about concerns over spending and paying down the deficit, right? And getting that under control. As this administration finds the waste, is able to, I guess the better way to word this is, do you support, should we send the money back in tax cuts as we work on tax cuts, or do we pay down the deficit, or can we do both?
I think that that mostly we should let the reductions in the size of government go to reducing spending,
Okay.
which will, over time, reduce the deficit. Um, on the other hand, and you raise taxes, as you know, we're doing a major tax bill this year. Some of that, I think, can be used for reducing taxes. But when you talk about that, you have to understand that if you reduce taxes in the right way, you grow the economy. And by growing the economy, you generate more revenue for the Treasury. And so we have to calculate out how much it takes to do those tax cuts when you account for the fact that you will have greater revenue and a stronger economy, better jobs, stronger, higher salaries, better benefits, and so forth. And that's the mix that we are working on right now. And as an example, I think everyone knows that the 2017 Tax Act that we are working to continue extending, if we let that tax act expire, it will result in a $2.6 trillion tax increase on Americans. And the Democrats are attacking us for trying to keep it in place because they're saying, it's just a tax cut for billionaires. The reality is there are rich people who get their taxes to be kept at the same level. But the fact is that $2.6 trillion of the $4.3 trillion hits people making less than $400,000 a year, and even more aggressively down at the lower and middle income categories. And then there's another huge chunk of it that goes to small businesses to help them have that 20% business pass through that keeps them comparable to the corporate tax rate, and that generates revenue. So this is where we are fighting. But the point is, we may want to add some additional tax policy in there, which is what your question was about. President Trump wants to cut taxes on tips, taxes on Social Security, taxes on overtime for manufacturing jobs, and each one of those is a good objective. But they have price tags.
Yeah.
And so we'll be doing a bit of that because the president has asked us to do it. But it's doing the math, that letting the most of the cuts that we find go to reducing the size of government.
Yeah, renewing those 2017 tax cuts is not going to be a light lift for you guys.
No.
What's the likelihood you're able to get that through?
Oh, I think we will get it through. The way I summarize it is I just have said it's a $4.3 trillion tax increase if we don't do it. I think that I really don't think the Republicans especially will let a 4.3 trillion tax cut or tax increase happen. There are some pieces of it that have already expired that we need to build back in, like the research and development deduction, which really boosts business growth and jobs and wages and everything else. And a thing called bonus depreciation, and then some accounting fixes so that businesses can have a fuller deduction of some of their taxes and other expenses. And if we do those things, it'll require us to use some of the money that we find in savings to offset them. But even then, what we are doing is we are offsetting tax cuts, not more growth of government. So I just want to be sure that people realize that when we talk about offsets, we're talking about reducing taxes.
Yeah. Wow. So much for you to work on. And one of the benefits you have is you have a pretty united conference right now, way more so than in times past. How long are the Republican Senate conference going to be able to stay so united to the mandate and the agenda before you start seeing some break off here and there?
Well, if I had the answer to that question, I would know. I'd be able to predict a lot more things. I don't know. In the Senate, we can lose 3 votes and still pass something with the vice president breaking the tie. In the House, they can only lose 1 vote. And they have some more movement going on in House races right now where they may get 2 votes for a few months. But they're down literally out of 435 people. Well, more, it's 435 total, but they've got a 1 vote margin to get to 218. And that's the answer to your question is, when will we be able to start losing that? Some of my House colleagues tell me they think we got one good shot at this and we better do it all in one big bill because we want to boost our defense spending. We want to give some additional money to border protection so that we can keep our border closed and get the illegal persons in the country out of the country, particularly the criminals.
Yeah.
There's going to be some price tags there, and we're going to have to pay for some things. And we want to open up oil and gas, and at the outset, that requires a little bit of an investment to get our leases operating again. So there is some spending that will need to be done. And the question is, how long can we still get that 218 votes in the House and 50 or 51 votes in the Senate? I don't know the answer to that question, but I'm pretty sure that we'll get one good shot at and it'll be a big shot because we know we may not get a second one. I personally think that we will be able to build the case if we work at it really hard to maybe do another good one. It'll require some better politics, but having done the first one in a way that satisfies everyone, I think will give us a chance to maybe even do some more later down the road.
And you have the landmark, these big legislative pieces that almost certainly party line vote type stuff. But you get a lot of stuff done that isn't front page legislation, but still very meaningful. And you team up with colleagues that you have almost next to nothing in common with what you think politically. Ranking Member Wyden's a good example where you two team up on a lot of legislation. And if you caught his sound bites or you followed his, social media posts, you think, well, those two guys have to be very different, but you find common ground. Talk to our listeners a little bit about how you forge such good relationships with people that you're on diametric ideology to.
Yeah, Senator Wyden and I are a good example of that. He has been the chairman and I've been the ranking member, and now I'm the chairman and he's the ranking member of finance. We are both from the Pacific Northwest, he from Oregon and I from Idaho. And our politics are very, very different. I'm very Republican, he's very Democrat. But there are many things where you can find common ground, and he and I have had many conversations that we need to do that to show people that Congress isn't just totally partisan bickering. And so we have done that on firefighting in the past. We have done that on a bill that hasn't yet made it to the finish line, but to reform the pharmacy benefit manufacturing system, the PBMs, a huge deal to reduce drug pricing. And we have worked very closely together on an issue that every rural county in Idaho knows very well, and that's secure rural schools funding. We've got a big bill that will fix that permanently, and we've got temporary bills that extend it while we get the big bill passed. And we've been battling very hard to keep that program going. That's the program, for listeners that aren't familiar with that acronym, or Secure Rural Schools. The counties, particularly the rural counties in Idaho that have a lot of federal land in their border, cannot tax that. The federal government does not allow a county to charge property tax on its ownership of the property. So they don't have a very big property tax base, and they are very, very limited in the amount of revenue they can generate from their population on a very small private sector ownership of property. And because the federal government has taken land out of their tax base, there have been payments over the years by the federal government to sort of make up for the federal property tax that they don't pay. That's what the Secure Rural Schools program is. And if our rural counties don't get that offset from that payment from the government to offset its refusal to let them be taxed, then it really impacts not only their schools, but their ability to do adequate law enforcement, their ability to do all sorts of other kinds of things for their communities. and their communities really lose from it. So this is a big deal. But anyway, that's something that Senator Wyden and I work closely together on too.
No, secure rural schools is a huge deal, and there are county commissioners throughout Idaho who are so grateful for this. And there are a lot of communities on the East Coast that have no federal land that have no desire to see any money go towards that. So you're fighting the good fight, and we appreciate that. One question I've got to ask, I'm going to ask, you got to be real and vulnerable with me, Senator. When we talk about you 40-hour type votes, when we talk about getting up early and staying late in the meetings and the running hard and going nonstop, some days you got to think, is this really worth it? And what am I doing here? And I know that you've got the heart for it and you're in good health. Do you ever, what is the kind of the why behind it? What keeps you going to stay late and work so hard?
Well, this may sound self-serving, I guess, but it is incredible to have the opportunities to make a difference on these kinds of issues that are so far-reaching. And the other side of it, which I'll push this back to my constituents and give them the credit. I have the best constituents in the United States of America. And the reason what I mean by that is I can make the tough votes. And when I come back to Idaho, I'm thanked by most of my constituents. A lot of my colleagues, when they make those tough votes, if they do, they're not thanked when they go home. And I'll give you an example of this. At one point, I was talking to one of my colleagues who was raising a lot of money for his campaign. And I said, boy, I wish I had that much money for my campaign. And he said, I'll tell you what, Mike, I'll give you all of my money if you'll give me your constituents. Because he said, your constituents are so wonderful that you are able to do what you need to do here without feeling the anger and the I don't know, the meanness that comes back in today's political world. So a part of the answer to your question is it's just the opportunity to really be able to make a difference. And the other part of it is it's the opportunity to work for people who really appreciate it and really respect the kind of government that Senator Risch and I fight for in Washington, D.C.
I love that. And I agree. The pioneer spirit here in Idaho of people who want to get involved and want to help their neighbor and learn about the issues and know that it's not as black and white is so true. You're standing on shoulders of giants. You had a brother who had a bright political future, did some amazing things, who passed away tragically. And my dad often talks about, your brother and learning from him and watching him and things like that. How often do you think about the legacy that you're leaving and those, your father, your brother, those other people that left pretty heavy imprints on our communities?
Well, I often think about them, like my father and my brother, whom you've referenced, Terry. And I've got a bunch of other brothers and sisters who are wonderful people. And and my mother, what a wonderful mother. I was blessed to have a wonderful father and a wonderful mother and wonderful brothers and sisters. And I've often thought about how blessed I am to have that. All I can tell you is I just consider that as very humbly and meekly. That I don't think it necessarily makes me great, but it sure makes me fortunate to have had an opportunity to be in such a wonderful family. I appreciate you bringing that up.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So there's more lighthearted. Whenever guests come on the podcast, we have to ask them a couple questions. Sure. One of them is what they're reading or what their favorite book is. So if you let us know what are you reading on the flights, and then what's something that is always I got to recommend this book to anybody.
Well, I'm going to really embarrass myself here because I used to read a book or two a weekend on weekend flights.
Okay.
I don't think I've read a book on a flight for a long time now, because what I do is I get on my flights with a book of briefs from my staff.
Oh, no.
I'm sorry. The answer to your question
You're reading briefs?
is the best brief I read last was the one for this meeting.
That must help you sleep well on the flights.
Yeah, it does. No, just jokingly, I have started recently reading some books on healthcare because I've really gotten into the topic of healthy lifestyle and so forth. And one that I read, I'll just reference it. It's called Outlive, and it just means to outlive your potential in a lot of ways. And it's by a doctor named Peter Attia. I really like that book. I'd recommend that one.
Fantastic. When you come to Idaho, you don't have a lot of time. You're running around. If there's a place you say, okay, if we have a bit of time to stop and grab a bite to eat, this is one of your favorites in the Gem State.
Favorite place to eat?
Yeah.
Wow.
This wasn't in the briefing paper, by the way.
Yeah,
we wanted to put you on the spot.
That was not in my brief. To be honest with you, I'm going to give you the same kind of answer. I don't honestly eat out a lot in Idaho or Washington, D.C., so my favorite place is probably my own kitchen. But I can't remember the name of it, but there's a little uh, Mexican food place in Boise that's right next to my hotel where I often stay. And I'm sorry I can't remember the name of it, but it's
Well, and we're
just,
glad we're not saying the hotel. Security,
yeah, I
we don't
won't
want
tell.
a bunch of
I
people
better not
knocking
tell
down
you
your
the
door.
hotel either. But it is. It's fabulous Mexican food, and it's not fancy at all. It's just a little kind of hole in the wall, beautiful Mexican place. That's as good as I
I
can
love
give
it.
you.
No, that's helpful. Senator, kind of departing wisdom for all of us. For those listening who have never spent a day in your shoes, who are not going to vote on the floor of the Senate, what's something you would say that every Idahoan needs to understand that they may not about what's happening in our nation's capital?
About what's happening, I think it is that um, I know the exact answer to your question. I'm trying to think how to put it. I think most people believe that Washington and Congress is a place that is a distant place where the decision makers don't really understand or care about their issues and their world, and that they can't make a difference about that. And that those senators and congressmen cannot be influenced, that they're influenced by big money or something else. And what I would say to my constituents is the exact opposite is true. Members of Congress listen intently to their constituents. I get a record every single day of every single contact that any Idahoan has made to my office, no matter how they make it. Phone call, letter, text, email, whatever, petition. And I know what the people of Idaho think and are saying. I hear them, and my staff meets with them across this state on a daily basis. I get a report from my staff about what they are saying and feeling. But you know who I hear from is the ones who speak out. And what I would say to people is, you can make a difference. Your voice matters. And it matters far more than you really think, because most members of Congress are motivated by one thing more than anything else, and that is what their constituents think. So don't think that you can't make a difference. That's what I would say.
Well said. You've been generous with your time. We appreciate what you're doing for the state. Good luck with the fight over there. We'll keep praying for you and Susan.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Senator. Till next time.